We have John Westbay in the studio, and we are going to be talking about the issues with Ryan Wright. Now, remember, for those who do not know, Ryan Wright used to be Ryan Pettit. And as he did with many of his businesses, as he got in trouble, they changed the names regularly. He also changed his personal name. So Ryan Wright was business partners with John Belshire while they were allegedly, Ryan has been indicted, bribing SLO County Supervisor Adam Hill. There's also allegations of fraud against contractors. There's also allegations they defrauded investors in our community. And the reason this is very, very important is over the last 20 years, there is regularly a new real estate scheme where investors and seniors in our community are fleeced from their retirements. You had Kelly Gearhart, you had Estate Financial, and now you have Belshire and Pettit. And this it changes lives. When someone invests their retirement and they lose their retirement and they have to work till they die, it changes people's lives dramatically. Back when I first started investigating Ryan Wright, John Belshire, and their PB companies, I wrote a couple stories, and multiple people called me to say, hey, I have information. I think I can help put this out. And primarily people that cared about the community. John Westbay was one of those people. He contacted me. We met together. I think we met at a hotel cafe, the Holiday Inn in San Luis Obispo, in the coffee shop. And we sat there for hours while he described Ryan's history, Ryan's family, Ryan's aggressive assaults on women, and Ryan's past financial schemes. Not the one that was going on currently, but that he had discovered Ryan was fleecing people in the past. Also, we discussed some issues that he had financially with Ryan, and we are going to go over all this today. I think it's going to be a fascinating show. And John, you're from Arroyo Grande. You're a family man. And are you from this area?
I am from this area, yes.
So you have known Ryan since he was a senior in high school?
Yeah, the first time I met Ryan, he was about a senior in high school. It was at the gym. And, you know, he was always talking to people, and he always tried to talk to me. We had a few conversations. I didn't really know him that well. Didn't really like him much. He was just cocky. He was a cocky high school kid. But that was the first time I ever met him. But I really didn't start hanging out with him until 2008.
And so you became involved with him in 2008. In the beginning, he was what did he do for a living in the beginning?
So in the beginning, a lot of people don't know this, but in the beginning, Ryan was and this was before he was into real estate, he was an Amway salesman.
And so he went from Amway salesman to a real estate scammer, according to what you told me in the past. Will you explain the real estate schemes that he was doing in the 2008-2009 time period?
Yeah, sure. So when I met Ryan in 2008, he was selling Amway. Of course, it took me a while to figure it out because he wouldn't just tell me. You know, he kind of drug me along. He'd give me little bits and pieces, little cookie crumbles. And finally, I kind of figured out what he did. And I did join, but it only lasted about a year. And the reason it lasted very shortly is because one of his mentors was actually a very higher up with the business. And his wife, the mentor's wife, filed for divorce because of infidelity. So the business kind of imploded. But around that time, I was actually very active investing in stocks. I made pretty good money. I had a pretty decent job, invested in stocks. And Ryan was very interested in what I was doing. But I was also very interested in real estate. So I took a real estate course through Robert Kiyosaki. I invited Ryan, and he went to one of the classes. And during that class, he told me what he was doing. He was actually already working on something. So what it was he had a friend that was in Amway, and this person was a businessman from Southern California. He was actually very well-to-do businessman. He was a real estate investor as well. He's a venture capitalist, but he also did Amway. So Ryan and this Amway friend, what they did, and just kind of, paint a picture of what was going on in society at the time. This is 2009. Now, you had people losing their houses left and right. You had everybody knew somebody that was going to lose their house, was behind on payments, or...
I remember.
Yeah, it was horrible, right?
It was bad.
It was
very
awful. I mean, people jumping out of buildings, kind of horrible. It was awful. And Ryan and his Amway buddy, they knew some guy from Southern California. I believe his name was Brandon. I don't remember his last name. But this Brandon, had several contacts at the bank loss departments. And the loss department is basically where you would call if you're going to negotiate a short sale or foreclosure. I think that's what it's called. I think they still call it that. But essentially what you would do, what this Brandon would do, he had all these contacts at the bank. So he would contact these banks on behalf of homeowners, people that had non-performing notes. So if you have a mortgage that's not performing, that's in default, they call that a non-performing note. So what he would do was he would actually, supposedly he can do this, he can actually negotiate the notes for 50 cents on the dollar. So if you had, say, a $200,000 mortgage and your house is only worth $150,000, in theory, he would be able to negotiate the note down to $100,000, and then he had $50,000 of equity. And it seemed like a pretty logical thing. I've actually seen large institutions do things like that before. Typically, they'll buy huge bulks of them, though. They won't do it at one house at a time, right?
Yeah.
They'll buy 200-300 non-performing notes, and then they'll do something like that with those non-performing notes. But these guys were trying to do it individually, just individual houses. So after a few months, they had about 20, 30 houses, because Ryan knew a lot of people. He talked to a lot of people, and so did his business partner. They had probably 20, 30 houses under contract that people were actually willing to let them do this with these houses. So what they would do was, what Ryan and his partner required them to do is that they would tell people, well, we're going to negotiate the note on your house. Okay, but we're going to have to take over the house, which means you're going to have to convey the property to us, because the bank will not talk to us unless we are the owners of the property, which I'm not sure if that was true or not, but that's what they did. So what they did is they formed a company called PR International Investments. This was a Wyoming company, and what they would do is they would talk to the homeowners. The homeowners would agree to convey the property to PR International Investments, and in doing so, now Ryan and his partner had control of the property, which means that the homeowner, which was probably the note holder too, would have to move out of the property. So at that time, Ryan was living with me in my house in Arroyo Grande. It was actually my mother's house. I was renting it from her. And I mean, he was always doing business. He was talking on the phone all day. That guy, I mean, most people who know him, he knows he can talk just all day long. He would talk 12, 14 hours a day on the phone. Always about business. It was always something about that. But one thing I noticed was that it did not appear that he was contacting anybody from any bank in regards to these properties. So I thought that was a little bit weird, because typically when you call a bank, especially during that time, you call the bank, you'd be on hold for 2 or 3 hours, because those people had hundreds of thousands of notes to work on. So I thought it was a little weird that I never heard him actually talk to a bank, because that's what he was supposed to be doing, right? But what I did hear was that he was talking to people, and what it seemed like his intentions were to rent those properties out. And that's exactly what he did. So all those properties that he took over, all he did, he and his partner did, is rent them out.
So they were able to put the properties in their names, rent them out, make a profit, and own properties and pay. Did they own the properties outright at that point?
They didn't own the property outright, because there was still a note that was non-performing on the property, and that's where the catcher is. Because when you and anybody correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't been in real estate forever, but if you rent out a property that is in default, you are legally required, if I'm not mistaken, to notify the new tenant that the property is in foreclosure. You can't just rent it out to them and then, 2 months later, the sheriff show up and they kick everybody out, right? But essentially that's what they were doing. They were renting these properties out. They wouldn't tell the tenant, because nobody in their right mind would probably want to rent the property out if they knew that it was going to be seized in the next few months. But that's what they were doing. They were collecting rents on these properties. And of course, the ultimate result was that every single one of those properties were foreclosed on. Not one of those properties were saved.
So what they did is they didn't actually transfer it over through a bank. They got the people to move out, lied to them, and then collected rent, first and last, deposits. And did they pay people back their deposits, or do you know?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure because he stopped living with me like mid-2010, and by that time, I'm not sure. I mean, he was still doing it, but he was living down the street from me at that time, so I'm not sure if he did or not.
And financially, was he living the high life at that point?
At that point, no. He was living off of me. So he was living in my house because he had lived down the street in his grandfather's house for many years with his mother and his little brother. And they sold the house. So when they sold the house, he needed a place to live. He was acting like he was going to, rent this huge mansion or whatever. And he's like, well, I might have to find a place to live before that because it's kind of hard to find these places. He was just kind of, rambling on. Well, I offered. I said, why don't you live with me? You pay me $500 a month. You can live in my room, and we'll just do that. And of course, he did, and he paid me for 2 of the months. And the next 10 months, he didn't pay me at all. And in fact, he wasn't making any money at all because he was still in Amway, which I wasn't making any money. And this note buying thing, that was, he would say he was making money doing it, but how can you make money when you haven't even closed on the property? Right? You haven't even sold the property. How are you going to make money? So I don't think he was making money at all, but he was definitely very good at grifting money from people. And, a lot of times we would go out, we'd have a good time, and he'd say things like, oh, well, I lost my credit card. I lost my ATM card. I always end up paying, right? So at that time, at least that particular time, like 2009, mid-2010, he was living off other people.
And at that point, was he going out drinking a lot? And was he doing the steroids?
At that time, I don't think so. I think that was not until like a year later. It was like a year later. Yeah. I don't remember us really. We drank at home. If we drank, we would usually drink at home. But we never go out a lot. But he didn't start going out drinking a lot until he until he found another deal. And he found a pretty good deal. And I noticed it was around the time that he did. And that was the San Carlos property in San Luis Obispo. You wrote articles about it, I know. Yeah, and what would happen was the owners of that property, their daughter went to school with him. Their daughter was actually his agent. And her husband went to school with Ryan as well. And he convinced their parents to go to Coast Hills, I believe it was, Coast Hills National or Federal Bank, and take out loans on their properties. And I believe it was somewhere around $300,000. And then all of a sudden around that time, it seemed like Ryan had a lot of money. We'd go out, he'd spend a bunch of money on this and that. He rented a pretty nice apartment in Arroyo Grande. And that's when I really noticed that Ryan, and I remember him actually having a conversation with me one time. He said, Westbay, he's like, dude, we've got so much money right now, I don't even know what to do with it. He's like, any deal you want to do, just send it to me. We have unlimited funds, that's how he talked. And at that point, I thought it was a little weird because he still hadn't really, because you can't make money in real estate till you sell or until you collect rents. And he hadn't been doing that. So I'm like, how does he have money all of a sudden? But I have a feeling as those people ended up suing him, that he was using their money for his own self-dealing.
And I have personally been watching another case. The Chase family is filed a lawsuit against them for they invested in properties. They did not get their money back. We're talking more than $2 million. And there's a lawsuit going on. And as part of this, they subpoenaed bank records. And I looked at the bank records on these projects, and you have money in the bank account, and they're buying plane tickets, they're buying shoes, they're buying flowers, they're buying dinners out. Now, flowers. You're going to a flower shop, buying a girlfriend flowers on the account for a development. It was quite shocking looking at the screen with this court case. It is still ongoing. It is likely to be done this week by Friday. Good. Yeah. But it's...
Yeah, it wasn't unusual for him, too, to take a private jet anywhere he wanted to go. I have pictures of it. He would put on his Instagram story, the stories only stay up for 24 hours. He put up pictures of him taking a private jet to some game, to the NBA Finals, I think it was a year ago. Just wherever. He take his little brother to a baseball game. I mean, everywhere. I mean, but private jets are not cheap. It's probably a good $4,000 or $5,000 to take a private jet to L.A. I would think, maybe even more. So they were doing that on a regular basis. That's all he did. Yeah, it just fell apart because most of those houses were already going to get foreclosed on anyway. And yeah, it probably, when he actually admitted it to me, because I had to pin him down several times to get him to tell me the truth. And finally I just said, hey man, what happened to those houses? And he said, yeah, they all got foreclosed. And I think that was probably late 2010. So, it was still, the market was not great. But, they were in default, and if they're in default for a certain amount of time, they're going to get foreclosed, and the bank will repossess the house.
So he defrauded the owners to giving him control of the home.
Yes, correct.
So he could make the money on the rents and the deposits in the first and last.
Correct.
So then, after he's doing other things and getting into real estate, and you're not working with him anymore at all, or he isn't living with you, this was a period of time when it appeared that he was hitting the bars hard, dating multiple very beautiful women, and getting accused of assault. Can you tell us a little bit about that period of time?
Yeah, so during that period of time, after he moved out of my house, he was actually dating a young woman, real nice girl from Morro Bay, I believe. I won't say her name, but they drank quite a bit. They partied pretty hard, and from what I understood, because I really didn't hang out with Ryan much because I was so upset with him, just over what happened with him living with me and everything. It didn't end well. So what he would tell me when I actually did see him is that, yeah, things got a little rough. Like, things got a little bad. Like, we got in a really big fight. We did way too much drinking. They were partying pretty hard, but he also told me that there was an incident that occurred where he got arrested. And
was this 2013 at the Cliffs?
No, this wasn't. No, this was different. This was before that. This was about 3 years before that.
And what happened in this occasion?
So what he told me was that it was a big misunderstanding. That, she was going crazy because she was drunk. She was going crazy. So what he did is he grabbed her by her arms and set her down in her chair and held her there. And then she called the police on him, and then he got arrested. But I don't think that's what happened. From what I've heard, because she's been very vocal about what her experience has been on social media, if you know who it is.
I interviewed her, and her story was that he held her, beat her head against a wall, locked her in a bathroom, and it wasn't over a few minutes. This was a extended period of time. Yeah,
and I also heard through an attorney that he sent her to the hospital a couple of times as well. So, yeah, that was probably one of those incidents where he did it.
And then what happened in 2013 at the Cliffs?
So in 2013, I was out with Ryan at the Cliffs with his girlfriend and my future wife, my girlfriend at the time. And it was New Year's. It was New Year's Eve 2012, New Year's Day 2013. We're out, having a few drinks, having a good time, and things looked like they were going pretty well. And then somewhere around midnight, I turn around, and in front of the bar, I notice that they're arguing. And the argument looked very heated. He was standing over her, and not only standing over her, but leaned over her and pointing at her while he was doing this. He had a drink in his hand while he was doing this. And at that point, you could read if you could read body language fairly well, you know what's going on. It was not good. So I stood kind of close to them just to kind of monitor things. And not too long after that fight started, he poured a drink on her head, and then he grabbed her. And I guess somebody else was watching too, because some guy grabs Ryan and he says, hey man, you can't do that to a woman. And Ryan turns around and clocks the guy right in the nose. He hit the guy so hard the guy didn't even fight back. He was a big guy too. So, at that point, I took him outside and I said, look, Ryan, I said, we need to have a conversation right now. You need to get your stuff together. You have a future ahead of you, and what you just did is completely out of line. You need to go outside with your girlfriend and have a civil conversation. Back in about
2014-15, we started covering issues with allegations of bribery to Adam Hill, allegations of fraud against investors and consultants regarding a group of people. They owned PB companies. At the time, it was Ryan Patetit and John Belshire. And There were multiple people that were claiming they were having issues getting paid as investors. There were lenders that ended up realizing that they had lended money and things weren't going the way they were told there was. There was quite a few things. And it was at this time that John Westbay, who used to be a close friend of John Patetit, now John Wright, gave me a call. We met. His information greatly helped my investigation, but I was very fascinated by his information on Ryan's history, including regularly assaulting women and being in trouble for assaulting different women over the years. One of the issues, too, was he was taking testosterone at one point, correct?
Yes, he was.
And did you notice a change in his personality when he started getting testosterone shots?
Oh, yeah, he got worse, especially when he would drink. He would get, it's not something that you want to take if you have anger issues or if you have issues with alcohol. It's basically the deadly concoction. In my opinion, I've seen it before, and with him, he definitely got worse.
And you were telling us a story back in 2013. John was with his girlfriend and Ryan's girlfriend at the cliffs when Ryan had become angry at his girlfriend. He threw a drink in her hair. He punched a man that told him to knock it off. Can you tell us the rest of your story?
Yeah, sure. So what happened was, once that happened, I grabbed Ryan and I said, "Look, Ryan," I said, "we need to go outside and you need to have a civil conversation with your girlfriend right now." A civil conversation. And he was yelling and cussing at me. He was extremely angry. So I told him, I said, "Look, Ryan," I said, "you have a future ahead of you," because at the time he was doing quite a bit. "You have a future ahead of you. You need to think about your future. What you just did is completely wrong. You need to go outside and have a civil conversation with your girlfriend right now." And for whatever reason, he did. So we went outside to the front of the building, to the building of the Marisol, and they were standing about maybe 10, 20 feet from the front door, and they were standing in front of a concrete bench. So I just kind of stood out there and watched them to make sure everything was going okay. And at first it seemed like they were doing okay. They were talking and talking. It seemed like things were rolling along and they were being civil. And it didn't take very long. And, the argument escalated and it got really, really heated. And I mean, it couldn't have been maybe more than 10, 20 seconds after it got escalated. I watched Ryan gear back and he hit her in the face. His girlfriend in the face. He hit her on the right side of her face. She falls down onto the bench. And then he grabs her by her collar, her jacket collar, and he slams her head right off the concrete bench as hard as he could. It was a horrible thing to watch. It's an absolutely horrible thing to watch.
Was she, how injured was she?
I quite frankly, I thought he probably killed her. You do that to somebody, they can kill them. And if you think about a few years before that at Alex's bar down the street, somebody got in a fight and he got slammed on the concrete and it killed him. It shattered his head. So, I was very concerned because she was just kind of laying there, but I ran over there as quick as I could and I took him and I pushed him back and I told him to stay away from her. But what happened after that was really, really scary because then, he stood there and he looked at me and his eyes got really big and I could see that he had a lot of rage in his eyes. And what you're talking about, the TRT, the testosterone, you have testosterone and a lot of liquor and you're already a mean drunk and you drink too much. That's just a really toxic combination. He came at me and I was like, oh boy, here we go. I'm bigger than him. I was bigger than him. He's a pretty big guy, but I'm actually bigger than him. But it didn't matter. If somebody's got that much rage in them, it doesn't matter. And I threw him off. I tossed him off of me and I told him to get lost. And finally at that point, somebody at the Marisol walked outside and said the cops are coming. And then at that point, you can see in his head, you can see the mice and the wheels kind of turning. You can see he was actually thinking. So basically what he did is he turned around and he ran. He ran through the parking lot and he went next door and he disappeared.
And what happened to the girlfriend? Did an ambulance come?
I don't think so. She actually got up. She was pretty stunned. I'm very surprised she actually got up. But when the police showed up a few minutes later, she actually was able to give a statement.
And was he charged in that incident?
He was. Yeah, he was.
And then there was another incident a few years later, correct?
Correct.
You want to tell us a little bit about that incident?
That would be the one that happened in my house.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So it was a few years after that, late 2015. I think it was around Thanksgiving. And I heard about this on the news because he was actually, at that point, we weren't really talking much because, we actually had a contract for him to develop that property that he lived in, and it was my property, and he was supposed to put houses on it. So, I wasn't really talking to him much, but I had heard that he went out that night down in the village of Arroyo Grande. I think it was around Rooster Creek or something, and he started, he was with his girlfriend. They were having drinks, and then he saw some other girls that he knew. And, he's flirting with them and buying them drinks, and the girlfriend didn't like it very much. So they went home, and from what I've seen on the police report and everything else, I mean, he beat the living daylights out of her. I mean, he beat her. He slammed her head into the ground. He put her head through a window in the bathroom, took her cell phone, locked her in the closet, and, I mean, it was pretty bad. He messed her up pretty bad. She ended up having to go to the hospital.
And that was the one that he was charged for. He was convicted, and he did get jail time. Now, you were watching the case. You actually showed up in court. And what happened? Did he, this took forever to go through. Can you tell us a little bit about why this got delayed?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not going to speculate too much on why I think, but I'll just tell you the facts. So, I think it was like early January 2019. He was supposed to be sentenced for the crime, and I wanted to be there. So I show up and I go into the courtroom, and during that time, they were actually doing arraignments. I think it was Judge Harmon was doing arraignments. So doing arraignment after arraignment after arraignment, and finally, for whatever reason, Judge Harmon goes, and I'm just paraphrasing this, but she says, I'm out of here. I'm gonna go. I have better things to do. And that was it. And she left, and then they took a break and they adjourned. And then as I'm sitting there, in front of me, you have, when you go into the courtroom where they're doing all their arraignments, you have all the ADAs, the assistant district attorneys. And there was about 5 or 6 of them in front of me, and I could hear them talking. And they're talking about Judge LaBarbera. They're like, yeah, LaBarbera's coming back. LaBarbera's coming back. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, I heard LaBarbera's coming out of retirement. Well, he had been in retirement. Judge LaBarbera had been in retirement for 6 months. But these guys were saying that he was coming back. And sure enough, he did. He came back into the courtroom and just, smile away and does a few more arraignments. And then not too long after that, Ryan's attorney, Patrick Fisher, walks into the room. He walks into the room, and he's sitting there waiting for his turn. And, LaBarbera calls him over, and I can hear them talking. They weren't whispering or anything. They were just talking. But he says, yeah, I'm going to need 3 months to get an extension on this sentencing because that was the time where Ryan was trying to change his last name.
He was Ryan Pettit.
He was,
and he went to Ryan Wright.
Correct. Yeah, so he was still trying to get that changed. And LaBarbera goes, well, you can't get sentenced without a name change, without your right name, so I'll go ahead and grant this. And just gave him 3 months right there. And he was supposed to get sentenced that day. So he wasn't being held in jail at the time. He was a free man. So
he also became involved for a short time on the Chase trial and allowed Ryan Ogden to step down as Ryan's attorney. And some people said it wasn't done all by the book, but he was in for that portion of the case. But currently they have Judge Kelly, who I am very impressed with, who appears to be a man who rules by the book.
Good.
So they do have a good thing going there.
Well, geez, it's been going on for 5 years. How does that happen? I know how it happens.
Yeah,
I've seen the motions that have been filed. Yeah, I know exactly how it happens. It's an absolute. It was a joke.
So, would Ryan talk to you about his behavior toward women and there have been allegations that he's sexually aggressive with women and has harmed women. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can tell you a lot about that. He's told me stories that just absolutely just make me disgusted. I think the first time he had mentioned something. Well, here's kind of a thing that he would tell me, or he would tell me. He would basically, if he was with a woman and they had sex, and she ended up in the gynecologist's office the next day, he considered that to be a badge of honor. And to me, I don't think that's a badge of honor at all. And I don't know any women out there that think that's a badge of honor. But the first incident I heard about was back in like 2009, 2010. He was dating this girl from out of state. He met her on Facebook. They talked a few times, and then he flew out to see her for the weekend. Well, that weekend they had sex. And then 3 weeks later or so, he went out to see her again. And of course, again, they slept together. So when he gets home, he tells me about, oh, what a great woman she is. And oh my gosh, but she was a freak, right? And I said, really, how so? And he says, well, I was so rough with her, she started bleeding. And I said, what? I said, he's like, yeah. He's like, I was like, she was bleeding, man. It was so rough. I'm like, and she was okay with that? He's like, oh yeah, buddy, she loved it. She loved it. And I'm like, well, I don't know, buddy. I'm 10 years older than you, and I've been around a lot longer than you, and I've known a lot of women, and a lot of women talk about sex, right? Never heard a woman ever say that she was okay with that. Never heard a woman say, boy, I wish somebody would be like that with me. Never in my life. And that girl actually he told me that girl ended up with some serious issues with her reproductive system. She ended up I think she had a ovary burst, and I believe she may have even contracted cervical cancer, from that whole incident, but she was pretty messed up.
And years ago, we were exclusively reporting that there were financial issues with John Belshire and Ryan Pettit at the time, Ryan Wright, the owners of PB companies. Ryan has been indicted by the feds. They are both battling court, multiple cases of people saying they defrauded them out, some of millions of dollars. This has been a common problem in our county. Real estate fraud is a big issue in San Luis Obispo County, and they generally go after seniors, and people who are retiring are the ones that have suffered the most in our communities. That's why this is a very, very important subject. Today we're focusing more on Ryan Pettit and his lifestyle, because I find it amazing. This was a young man who ended up getting some of the wealthiest men in our community to work with him and give him money, and he became one of the biggest players in real estate. Well, at the same time, he allegedly ran a real estate scheme before, and he had a history of assaulting women and very bad acts with women. And one of the things that I had heard was a number of women came out with venereal diseases at the end of this.
Yes.
And several of them, it was vaginal warts, and they later also had cancer.
I'm not sure about the warts, but from what I understand, I believe it was 3 of them that I know of for sure ended up with cervical cancer. So, yeah, and this was right after they were with him.
And one of the things that that I found very interesting was your comment, Ryan was raised by wolves. This is what happens when a man is raised by wolves. Mm-hmm. Ryan was raised in Arroyo Grande. He went to Arroyo Grande High School. He had a stepfather who was a police officer, but there is a lot more to the story. Can you tell us what you know about Ryan's upbringing, his family life, and you were with him when he first met his real father, correct?
I was, yes.
Well, let's start by talking a little bit about his early years.
Okay, so his biological father was not Pettit. So his biological father, I believe when he was in high school, had a relationship with his mother, and she got pregnant. So, and everything I'm telling you is what Ryan told me. So she had Ryan at a very young age. She's not much older than me. She's only like 5 years older than me. So she had Ryan at a very young age, and basically, I don't know if it was a few years after that, but his biological father came out as a homosexual. So he never had any involvement in Ryan's life whatsoever. I did meet his father one time. It's like 2010. He came to a birthday party, and looks a little bit like Ryan. He was a really nice guy, but yeah, I'd met him, and that was the only time I ever saw him. Yeah.
And he was not close with Ryan.
No, yeah, not at all. In fact, I remember one time he called Ryan when we were driving to Bakersfield, and he gets off the phone with him. He's like, that's only the 3rd time I've ever spoke to my father in my entire life. And I was like, really? That's only the 3rd time? He said, yeah. He never contacts me. He mostly never wants anything to do with me.
And so what was his home like? So his mother gets pregnant when she's very young, in high school.
Yes.
she has Ryan, and she marries Petit.
Yeah. Yeah, so she married Robert Petit, who was a former Pismo Beach police officer, from what I understand. I think he lives in Oregon now. But she married Robert, and she had 2 other boys with him, Ryan's half-brothers. So, and this was also what Ryan told me about Robert. He said he was very abusive towards him, but also very abusive towards his mother. So he was exposed to that at a very early age. I mean, can you imagine not having a father, and then the only person you know as a father is a very, very abusive person, and he abused you and he abused your mother on a regular basis. He
didn't abuse his own son, so correct?
Not that I've ever heard. I don't know that for sure, but from what I understand, probably not. He didn't tell me anything about that, but I gathered that he hadn't done it.
And did Ryan know in the beginning that this man was not his father? Or did his mother tell him later?
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure. I think he knew. I think he actually did know, but I'm not sure about that.
And what happened? He was a police officer. He came in a little bit of trouble with the police department.
Right.
And lost his job over money from the...
the evidence locker.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he ends up leaving town. They divorce.
Yeah. Yeah, they divorce. He moves to Oregon, and he takes one of his sons, Ryan's middle brother, with him to Oregon, and that's where he's been ever since, as far as I understand.
Is this the same brother that Ryan was arrested for assaulting a couple years ago?
No, it was actually his youngest brother, according to court records that I looked up. I think this was in Oregon, so he was probably visiting his father and his brother and his middle brother. But yeah, this was like in 2017. He was arrested for 4th-degree assault. And I was just curious. I looked up the complaint. I called the DA's office, and I got a copy of the complaint. Sure enough, he assaulted his little brother.
So this is a young man who doesn't really have much of a history of success in life, and he ends up getting in a partnership. Now, you don't have to give the names of the other people, but were you there when Ryan first met John Belshire?
I wasn't physically there when he met John Belshire, but he told me all about it.
So how did this come about?
So what happened was, and this is probably like 2010, I think it was. So Ryan, when we worked out at Pismo Athletic Club, there was a developer who worked out there as well. And Ryan, I mean, he was always really good at networking and getting people to convince them that he was somebody big. And he was actually able to convince this developer that he was doing big things. So from what Ryan told me, this developer was using John Belshire on occasion to do some work for him on some projects. So they would go to his office and hang out. And, of course, Ryan would strike up a conversation with Belshire. And, he told me all about it. Like, oh, this guy's great and everything else. And then over time, what I come to realize is that he was spending a lot of time in Belshire's office. So in the beginning, he would go to Belshire's office almost every day, and they'd talk about doing projects. So I'm pretty much sure that's how it all started.
And from there, they became partners in PB companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from there, they became partners in PB companies.
It just, to me, I am surprised that educated, intelligent, well-to-do men throughout the county were investing and working with Ryan Petit.
Yeah, myself included, Karen. But it's. I'll tell you, Karen, you could put 100 people in a room with Ryan Petit, and he will convince 99 of them that the sky is yellow. He can do that. He's that good. I don't know how he does it. It's some sort of innate trait that he has. He is so good at convincing people that what he's doing is right, and that's what he did. Because you look at the people who got scammed. I mean, look at Russ Chappelle. Russ Chappelle was one of the youngest people ever to pass the oral surgeon board. He's a very bright guy. I know Russ. You talk about Jeff Chase. Jeff Chase went to school. He's one of Belshire's best friends. Smart guy, wealthy guy. You talk about like Henry and Laura Watts. They're one of the investors that got taken. You talk about myself. I'm an educated guy. I'm smart. But when you have somebody like Ryan, he has something I've very rarely seen in people in my entire life. I've known a lot of people, but I've very rarely seen somebody who can just convince anybody that he's the Messiah, and he can do it. And that's why Belshire stayed with him for so long. He told me.
And let's look at what happened to you. So you've let him live with you, and then you go into a business agreement with him. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what happened?
Yeah, sure. So what happened was after he moved out of my house in like 2010, I wasn't really talking to him too much. So I was still pretty actively looking for properties to flip because that's what I like doing. I was working in Bakersfield at the time, and I just finished up a flip. So I was looking for something else. And I found a property over on Alder Street in Arroyo Grande. And this was like the perfect property to flip because it was really cheap, bank owned. It had this huge, disgusting looking unpermitted pool in the back that nobody wanted to touch. And I was like, yeah, this is what I want. I think I could figure out something with this. So I had another investor with me who I was going to work the project with. And anyways, it was really weird because we show up to the property and Ryan's there. And I hadn't seen Ryan in months. And I'm like, okay. So obviously I was thinking to myself, well, the guy I was with told Ryan because he wanted money from Ryan. And, you know, I was just like, okay, I don't really want to look at you right now. I was not really happy with him. But, you know, he apologized, which was he was always really good with that, especially with his girlfriends. Apologize. Sorry, man, you're one of my best friends. You know, it was really dumb of me to be that way towards you. But look, here's what's going on right now. Because all I wanted to do was just flip the property. But he saw something different. It was a half-acre property. He wanted to build houses on it. He said, look, if you purchase this property, I'll get you the money for it. We can hold on to the property. And then what we'll do in a couple of years is we'll develop it. Well, I really didn't want to do that with him. I was like, nah, I really want to work with you on that. So why don't I just assign you the property, do an assignment of contract. So an assignment of contract is like when you put a property under contract, you basically assign it to somebody in escrow for like a finder's fee. And I just wanted like $10,000. That was it. Okay, I'll sign it to you for $10,000. You take over it, do whatever you want. So we agreed on that. Well, 2 months later, he didn't come up with the money. He didn't come up with the money at all. So I fell out of escrow, embarrassed myself. I fell out of escrow, embarrassed myself at the bank. I lost face with the realtor I was working with. And, you know, I basically put my head between my tail and I walked off. Well, who do you know? What do you know? Who buys the property? Ryan Patetti goes right in there with a partner of his, a friend of his, and takes it down with a hard money loan, which is basically a high interest loan that investors use, to purchase properties. Takes it down with a hard money loan. His investor friend comes in with the seed money to cure the loan because they give you like 60 cents on the dollar, right? You can't just get like a 95% loan to value with hard money. So his friend came in with the seed money and then also the construction money, and they took down the property. And that enraged me even more. I was like, that is it, man. I said, I really am upset because you did that. We had a deal. And he's like, look, man, he's like, this is going to be a huge development because there was a lot behind it and there was a lot right next to the property that he just bought, the Alder property, that was going to be developed, and it's still being developed right now. It's like 30-something houses. This is going to be a pretty big project, and that's why we wanted to do it. But look, we have a hard money loan on the property. We're paying 16% interest. We can't hold it for 2-3 years at 16% interest. So why don't you just buy the property from us with an FHA loan, and you'll be the owner of the property. You can live in there, and we'll just go ahead and we'll start on the entitlement process with the city of Arroyo Grande, and we'll get things going here. And I agreed. And
so you bought the property in your name?
I bought it from him and his partner.
Yeah. And then what happened?
So, after that, and the thing is that I could see why he was able to convince people to give him money, because he told me that within 2 years, the property would either be built, it would be built out, or in the process of being built. So that meant like somewhere around 2013, because I bought it in late 2011. So he said that the property would be built, and I believe that. And, it just never, it seemed like nothing was ever happening. But what was happening was that Ryan was starting to take down even bigger properties in San Luis Obispo County. You're talking about like the Long Benetti Ranch project, right? He was talking about that all the time. He was talking about the Toad Creek project in Templeton. There's like 30, 40 houses over there. Vineyard, he was talking about all these projects. I'm like, well, why aren't you talking about my project? We had a deal. And I just kind of got put off on the barn burner. And then, of course, once 2013 came around, when when he beat his girlfriend up in front of me, that pretty much ended the whole thing, because I basically didn't want anything to do with him anymore. I didn't, we still had that project that had to get resolved, but after that, things just really fell apart.
So why was he living in the house?
He was living in the house because he was paying me rent to live there. So at first I was living in the house, but, my girlfriend, we got serious. So I moved in with her, and, of course she became my wife. But, I moved out of the house, and he just stayed there because he really, he didn't have really good credit, and I don't think anybody would probably rent him a house. But, I stayed in there, and I said, as long as you pay me rent, I'll pay the rest, because there were 2 houses on the property. So somebody was living in the back unit, and as long as you pay me this amount of rent and then he pays me rent, then we're good. We can just pay the mortgage. We'll just pay the mortgage off the minimum payment every month, and that's what he did. So.
Did he continue to pay the rent, or was there a point where he stopped paying and still lived there?
Yeah. So what happened was, right after that incident happened at the Cliffs, that's when things really fell apart. So he and his attorney relentlessly tried to get me to testify in front of a jury under oath and say that I didn't see anything. I didn't see it happen. And I told him no. And that's where everything went south for me. I told him no because I wasn't loyal. And there was no way I was going to do that.
He asked you to perjure yourself.
He asked me to perjure myself.
In a criminal trial.
He and his attorney did.
Who was his attorney?
Well, I don't want to say, but yeah.
Was it?
No, his attorney, it was somebody who's representing a pretty high-profile client in this area, representing the Smarts. The guy.
Okay.
Yeah, the guy.
So they
Smart,
asked
yeah.
you.
Yeah,
they asked you to perjure yourself.
Yeah, well, he didn't put it that way. He said, well, you're not going to lie or anything. You're just going to say that your field of view was obstructed and you didn't see anything happen.
But that would have been a lie.
That would have been a lie, and I was not going to do that. And I was not going to do that. And that was, when you look back at it, I mean, that basically destroyed the deal, and that destroyed my life. But I was not going to compromise myself or my integrity for somebody who did something that could have killed somebody. There's just no way I was going to do that. And then, 3-4 months after that happened, all of a sudden he started writing me checks, bad check after bad check after bad check, and it just kept going on and on. And it went on for over a year. And I think after a year and a half, he wrote me about $30,000 in bad checks. And finally, I had enough. I told him, I called him up. I said, look, man, why don't we just sit down and talk about everything, okay? We don't need to be, texting each other and doing all this. I know you're busy. I'm busy too. Let's just sit down and talk about this. And he never responded to me. So
he was living there free, and you weren't able to get him out because you had a deal going with him.
He wasn't living there for free. He was paying me. But at the time, once that 2013 incident happened, there were months where he wouldn't pay me because the check would bounce so many times. Eventually, it would clear most of the time. But toward the end, when I sued him, when I tried to evict him, he hadn't paid me in 3 months. So, yeah, that was basically it. I had enough. I submitted all the checks down to the San Luis Obispo District Attorney's Office Economic Crime Unit, and they charged him with felony check fraud.
And I remember that he was able to take classes on allegations he bribed the home in Arroyo Grande.
Yeah, so sometime around 2014, I was able to get a judgment for possession against Ryan, which is basically when you evict somebody, you get a judgment for possession, which means you can possess the property. So the sheriff's department was actually on their way out to evict Ryan from the property, and then my attorney calls me. And he says, well, John Belshire's on the other line, and he says that he would like to have, paraphrased, a friendly conversation. We can either have a friendly conversation or we can fight. And at the time, this is 2014, this is when they were on the high and mighty. Everybody was, they were definitely in a position where if they did sue me, then I probably would have gotten crushed because they were very strong at the time. They were getting all kinds of money. Everybody loved them. Adam Hill was on their side. All these people were on their side. So, I chose to sit down and have a mediation with them, and we worked it out.
And then did they leave, or did Ryan continue to stay at the property and not pay you rent?
He actually continued to stay at the property, but it didn't really, it really didn't work out much longer because I think there was another bounce check after that. And finally I had enough, and I contacted Belshire. And when I contacted PB Company's office and talked to the chief of operations, I said, look, man, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I want to talk to Belshire. And we agreed to meet that time in February 2015. And I told them, I said, I want out of this deal. I said, you guys need to buy me out right now.
And did they?
No. And I gave them plenty of concessions too. I gave them a year to purchase that property. And it wasn't even, I think the purchase price was only like $450,000. And you see what houses cost around this area, and they're doing millions of dollars, millions and millions, like $200-300 million, but you can't purchase a $450,000 house. Are you kidding me? So it just drug on and on and on. And it's just, it came to a point where, like about a year after that conversation I had with John Belshire, there was a water leak in the house, and I came to find out that Ryan's little brother had done some work. He's not a contractor. He's not a plumber. He did some work underneath my sink. It didn't work out really well. So the water line burst, flooded the house, and now all of a sudden there's the house is completely destroyed.
And they did. So Belshire had insurance on the property, and he collected the insurance payment. Did they clean up the property with the insurance money?
No. What happened, I had insurance on the property because it was in my name. So what happened was they started working on it right away. His contracting company, which is basically his little brother and his friends. So his little brother and his friends and a few other guys fixed the property up without my knowledge. I saw what was going on. They did it without my knowledge. They did it without my permission. I basically told them, I said, you're at fault for this. You guys need to pay for this. I'm not going to put a claim against my insurance company. And when I did that, they threatened me again with a copy of a complaint that was not filed from their attorney, Roy Ogden. Basically, it was like a lawsuit. They sent it to me through mail. So, they threatened me again. And, at that point, I had to hire an attorney. And that's pretty much where it all started. And we went back and forth, and back and forth. I just wanted them to do what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to purchase the property from me.
In the end, how much money did you lose in 4 years of no rent and other costs? What do you think the cost to you was? Oh boy,
it's really hard to say, Karen. I would say probably at least $300,000. When I finally sold that property in 2020, after they completely trashed it, I had about $500,000 in credit card debt. And thankfully, I've settled it all with the banks. I had to call every single one of my creditors and negotiate with them. But I had about $500,000 in credit card debt from it because once came a point where it's just I couldn't keep up with the attorney bills anymore and paying paying on the mortgage, so I had to use my credit cards, and it really starts to accelerate quickly when you use those because you're getting charged interest, and it starts to get out of hand.
And this is why these stories are important. There are so many people in our community that have been financially damaged by this type of actions, while you had a lot of people in the who's who's in the court system, in government, that were pushing through their projects, giving them permits very quickly, helping them do what they were doing. But there were many people destroyed. And you're not a senior, but you have 3 small children.
I do.
This was a financial hardship.
It was horrible, and it was going on right when they were born. I have 4-year-old triplets. So, imagine having 3 little babies at the same time being born. At the time, I was over $300,000 in debt. I had my business was winding down because me and my partner didn't agree. I had a pretty successful business, so I was making no money. And, it was supposed to be the greatest moment of my life when they were born. And it was, it was when they were born. They're so cute. But, there was this rain cloud over me, and it really, really depressed me. It was really hard because, it wasn't supposed to happen like that. But it did, and here I am. I'm like, what am I going to do? I mean, what am I going to do? Am I going to be able to even feed these kids?
And I will tell you, they are the cutest triplets. The boys are identical twins, and the girl is fraternal. Yeah. And they are the most adorable triplets I've ever seen.
Thank you.
You are very lucky. And you've gotten through it, and you've gotten yourself back on track.
Yes.
And but one of the issues that a lot of people do not realize, there was a lot of threatening going around. I had attorneys that were trying to help me at a time that I was being threatened because of my coverage. And I had one attorney I went by, and he had put a gun in his office. And he had been walking somewhere, and someone walked up to him and said, "Are you so-and-so, and are you involved in this? Well, you shouldn't be her attorney." Did you ever have anybody walk up to you? Did you have any actual threats other than the legal ones from John Belshire.
Yeah, I did. This was after Ryan was arrested for beating that girl up in my house back in 2000. It was like early 2016. What happened was I was driving on the road and I noticed that it looked like somebody was following me. And I get these hunches all the time where you're driving and it just kind of looks weird. Somebody looks like they're following you, but I really had this hunch because it appeared the person was looking at me. So I pull off of Briscoe Road. I was going north on 101. I pull off from Briscoe Road and I turn around. I go towards the library, and the person's still following me. So I pull into the library and I get out of my truck, and I always keep a weapon under my truck. I had my hand close to it, and this guy gets out and he says, "Are you John Westbay?" I said, "Yeah, I am." And I just kind of looked at him and he said, "Well, maybe you should be careful what you do around here because you never know what can happen."
Clearly a threat.
Yeah, it was clearly a threat. Yeah, and he was definitely looked like somebody who can carry it out. He did not look like a very good person.
I had a person that was supposed to testify in a trial that I had, and I had 3 witnesses. 2 died before trial came, and the third said that they were threatened, and a couple days before the trial were ran off the road and were in the hospital and unable to testify, and they believe it was tied to this.